My name is Christopher Chris Nguyen. I'm 18 years old, and I'm about to tell you why I've stopped being my parents' practice kid. Ever since I can remember, I've felt the weight of their expectations like a steel chain wrapped around my chest, impossibly heavy, impossibly cold. I'm not here to whine or play the victim. I'm here to lay it all bare because sometimes the scariest thing isn't telling the truth. It's realizing nobody's ever asked for it. Picture me at 16, pacing my tiny bedroom in Palo Alto, the fluorescent glow of my laptop screen bouncing off the glass-framed certificate on my wall that reads Valedictorian Candidate Crestwood Preparatory School. Next to it sits the old pocket watch my dad gave me on my 10th birthday, its hands frozen at 10:15. The exact time he promised he'd always be there for me. But just like that, watch Dad's promises stuck in place while everything else kept moving. Every night, I'd wind it hoping for a miracle, but the gears never turned. I'd lie awake wrestling with the unfairness of it all. Why I was grounded when my siblings were free, why I was forced to get straight A's while my brother could skate by on C's. Why every birthday gift I opened felt like an afterthought compared to the lavish surprises they saved for my younger sister. And every time I confronted them, their answer was the same. You're our practice run. Growing up, my home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a testing lab. My dad, Dr. David Nguyen, is a brilliant bioengineer at a cutting-edge firm in the city. My mom, Sarah, is corporate counsel at a hotshot tech startup. By day, they saved the world with patents and contracts. By night, they conducted experiments on my life, calibrating rules and punishments with scientific precision. I was the variable in their grand experiment, the control group whose mistakes would teach them how to raise the perfect second and third children. I remember the first time I realized I wasn't their pride and joy. I was 9, and my older cousins had come over for dinner. They played video games in the living room while I sat at the dining table, forced to finish every last pea on my plate before I could go anywhere near the console. My cousin Jake could leave 5 peas and not a single word was said. I asked Mom later, blinking up at her in confusion, and she shrugged. They learned from you? She said casually, as if I were nothing more than a lab rat. I almost laughed. That was the moment I understood how deep the injustice ran. By the time I hit high school, I'd transformed my resentment into resolve. I launched a weekly podcast, Under the Clock, where I dissected the unspoken pressures of being the eldest, the overachiever, the so-called trailblazer for your siblings. Julia Tran. My best friend since kindergarten helped me set up the mics in her garage. Together, we poured our hearts into each episode, hoping someone out there would hear the familiar ache in my voice and feel less alone. We'd record intro clips where I'd hold up that rusted pocket watch, tapping it against my palm, the echo impossibly loud in the silent room. This watch stopped working the day I stopped trusting my parents. I'd say softly, and Julia would fade in with somber music as I dove into another story of unfair curfews, mismatched Christmas presents, and college funds that existed for my brothers, but not for me. Listeners started to write in, sharing their own practice kid horror stories. It felt good. No, it felt necessary. But every new follower, every empathetic DM also became another reminder that I was still stuck in their experiment, still waiting for a resolution that never came. Then came the risk. One night, under the dim glow of my desk lamp, I decided to test their limits publicly, using Marcus Lee's video camera. Marcus, being the quiet kid who sat 2 rows behind me in AP biology and secretly recorded family dinners for a school documentary, I live-streamed myself trying to follow every rule they'd ever set. No phone past 8 p.m., no social events, finishing dishes in silence, logging my homework time in a spreadsheet I shared with my mom in real time. I called it 24 hours in the Nguyen lab, and within hours, it blew up. Hundreds tuned in, watching me mutter curses under my breath as I scrubbed the kitchen floor at midnight while they saw Sarah's text pop up. 3 more math problems or you're grounded. When I fell asleep at 3:17 a.m., exhausted and furious, Someone in the chat asked, "How are your brothers and sister handling this?" I looked at my phone. Nothing. They were off at a friend's house, free as birds, untouched by the chaos I'd unleashed. My heart hardened in that moment. That pocket watch became my secret weapon. After the live stream ended, I uploaded a close-up photo of it frozen at 10:15 captioned, "Time to stop being the test subject." By then, it wasn't just about me. It was about every kid who felt like they were chiseled out to be the scapegoat, the guinea pig, the endless practice run. But my parents saw it as betrayal. They called the school board, demanded my podcast be shut down, told Principal Johnson that I was defaming the family. The next morning, I found Dad's corporate assistant at my front door, serving me with a cease and desist notice. Here in the heart of Silicon Valley, I realized innovation had its limits when it involved family. My home was no longer just a house. It was a battleground where I was pitted against the people who were supposed to protect me. And that's where we are now. Me stripped of my privacy, labeled a troublemaker. My world shrinking as my parents tightened their grip. But the more they try to silence me, the louder I get. Because if you've ever felt like nothing more than practice, you know the pain, the indignity, the rage. You know how it twists your bones, how it hammers at your soul. So I keep winding that watch each night, and I keep speaking into the mic because my time is coming. I can feel it in my blood in every skipped heartbeat when I wonder what they'll do next. But I'm ready for whatever comes because for the first time, I'm not alone. And I'm not afraid to break the rules they wrote for me. And that, my friends, is where our story really begins. I picked up the shattered pieces of my confidence and decided it was time to step out of the shadows of my parents' lab and into the harsh light of the real world. I remember the morning I strapped on my messenger bag, the worn leather edges soft from years of carrying textbooks, my laptop, and that idiotic pocket watch that never worked. I walked down the cul-de-sac of Maplewood Drive, past manicured lawns that smelled of fresh mulch and fertilizer, past neighbors sipping their morning coffees, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I was supposed to be the perfect son, top grades, model behavior, glowing recommendations for any university I chose. But now, with the cease and desist trembling in my hand, I felt something I hadn't in years, pure, unfiltered freedom mixed with terror. My first stop was Ms. Patel's office. She was the school counselor who had quietly collected evidence of my parents' hypocrisy texts, where Dad threatened no college money emails, where Mom bragged about learning from Chris's mistakes. She wasn't just an adult on paper, she was my secret ally. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door, her face lit up with relief. "Chris, I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice gentle but urgent. She handed me a sealed envelope stamped with the school letterhead. Inside were dozens of testimonials from friends, classmates, even teachers who had noticed how I was singled out for every minor slip-up. Even my chemistry teacher, Mr. Hernandez, admitted that when I scored a B on the midterm, I was sentenced to 2 weeks of mandatory after-school lab cleanup while my sister's D on the same test was congratulated as improving. I stared at the paper, the words swimming before my eyes, and felt a swell of anger and vindication. At that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I decided that day to take the biggest risk, yet present all this evidence to the school board. If I could make them see that my parents were weaponizing love, turning rules into a cage, then maybe, just maybe, they'd intervene. But to do that, I needed allies beyond the walls of Crestwood Preparatory. That's when I reached out to Marcus Lee. Marcus wasn't a social butterfly. He was the quiet kid with the camera always filming something for some project. He had footage of dinner conversations, bedtime rules, curfew check-ins. We met after school at the abandoned railroad tracks on the edge of town, the place where Julia and I used to daydream about escaping our lives. Marcus handed me a USB drive. "Everything's here," he said without looking up. "From the day your mom texted that she'd freeze you out if you didn't get straight A's to the time your dad forgot your graduation tickets existed." The weight of the drive in my pocket was heavier than any backpack I'd ever carried. Night after night, Julia and I pored over the footage in her garage, the cramped space lit by a single work lamp and the glow of my laptop. The engine from the old Buick we used as a windbreak hummed in the background as we mapped out a presentation. I watched myself on screen, head down at the dinner table, hands shaking as Mom's text notification chimed, Dad's voice booming, "This is for your own good." I felt my heart break a little each time, but also hardened. Every clip was fuel for the fire I was building. Julia, ever the technician, spliced the most damning moments into a 10-minute reel with dramatic cuts between my loneliness and my siblings' laughter. She overlaid it with ambient piano, and at the very end, a close-up of that stopped watch. "Time's up," the title card read in stark white letters. As the premiere of our exposé approached, I felt the familiar churn of butterflies in my gut, only this time they were laced with defiance. I scheduled the school board meeting, submitted my packet of evidence, and spread the word on social media. The hashtag #PracticeCam. No more lit-up Twitter and Instagram feeds, and for once, I felt the anxious buzz of excitement rather than dread. But the night before the meeting, doubt crept in. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the watch's frozen face. Closing my eyes, I played a loop of my parents' apologies non-existent. I remembered how Aunt Karen had sneered when I questioned why Lily got the family investment practice runs deserve no reward. She had manipulated my parents using their own biases against me. I clenched my fist until my knuckles turned white. The next morning, I vowed the twist would cut deeper than any of them expected. On the day of the hearing, the boardroom was a sterile glass box perched atop the district office building, panoramic windows revealing the endless sprawl of Silicon Valley. My parents sat to my left, flanked by Aunt Karen and a lineup of hush money attorneys. To my right were Ms. Patel, Julia Marcus, and a handful of students wearing How Practice No More wristbands. The board members sat impassively, pens poised over notepads. I stepped up to the podium, the watch in my palm, and exhaled. I began my presentation with the same line I'd used in every podcast episode. My name is Christopher Nguyen, and for 18 years, I was their experiment. The videographer live-streamed to local news channels, and I knew this moment would be splashed across Twitter before I even finished my first slide. As I clicked through the clips, I watched my parents' faces shift from smug confidence to thinly veiled panic. Their contrived apologies, drafted by corporate PR, crumpled under the weight of raw, unedited footage. But then, just when I thought I had them cornered, I delivered the real twist. I paused the video at the frame where Aunt Karen's reflection showed in the kitchen window as she whispered into Mom's ear. "Promise me you'll cut him off," she'd said. I turned to face her directly. "This wasn't just my parents' doing," I said, voice steady. "It was orchestrated by someone who wanted to keep me small so their own child could shine." The gasps in the room were audible. Aunt Karen's face drained of color as her secret partnership with a local venture firm, a firm that funded Lily's startup ideas, was exposed. The board members leaned forward, pens scratching on paper. Even my parents looked betrayed. I could see the flicker of remorse in my mother's eyes, but it was too late. I ended the presentation by holding up the broken watch. "This was supposed to mark our time together," I said, but Dad and Mom chose to freeze it instead of letting it move forward with me. I placed it gently on the podium, the glass face cracking under its own weight, as if it too had endured too much. "I'm asking for fairness, for accountability, and for the chance to live my life uninterrupted by the terms of someone else's experiment." Then I stepped back, heart pounding, awaiting the verdict. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock, its hands moving forward without me. As I walked out the summit of this battle behind me, but the war still ahead, I felt the first real sense of liberation pulse through my veins. But beneath that thrill was a darker realization: the fight for justice was far from over, and I had just shown my cards. I could feel the world watching, waiting to see if I'd crumble or rise. My phone buzzed with notifications, reports, retweets, messages from strangers who saw themselves in my story. I looked back at the watch on the podium now, a cracked monument to betrayal and resilience. The next chapter loomed. I had to rebuild trust in myself, decide how to move forward without letting anyone else define my worth, and face the consequences of exposing my own family. And as I stepped into the bright hallway, the doors closing behind me echoed like a heartbeat, steady, unyielding, ready for whatever came next. That evening, as I sat alone on Grandma Lynn's porch swing, the Bay Area sky smoldering pink and gold, I felt the weight of everything I'd unleashed settle onto my shoulders. The school board had ruled in my favor, mandating my parents to revise their curfew policies, to officially apologize, and to set aside part of the family trust for my college fund. But the public reckoning was just beginning. My phone buzzed, nonstop DMs from interviewers, messages of support, angry threats from strangers who thought I'd betrayed my family. I rocked gently, the same pocket watch dangling from my finger, its cracked glass catching the last rays of sun. It had become both a trophy and a reminder. Time moves on whether you like it or not, and once you break something, you can never make it perfectly whole again. The next morning, Grandma Lynn called me into the kitchen before dawn, a steaming cup of jasmine tea in her hand. "You did good, Chow," she said, her voice steady, despite the dark circles under her eyes. But the storm is nowhere near over. I wrapped my hands around the cup, breathing in the earthy aroma, and nodded. She wasn't wrong. My parents, stung by the humiliation at the board meeting, had launched a counteroffensive, quietly funneling money into a local PR firm to paint me as an ungrateful child who'd tarnished the Nguyen name. Flyers appeared in my high school locker. "Stop Chris's lies," complete with cherry-picked quotes, Dad's photo smiling proudly, and a faceless, "Where's the real story?" tagline. Even Aunt Karen, that master manipulator, slipped back into my life with false sympathy. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Her soft words made my skin crawl, but I forced a polite smile. I decided I wasn't going to shrink back. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. I spent that weekend scripting a new podcast episode, this one under the title The Other Side of the Experiment. I opened with the sound of a ticking clock, muddy and warped, then layered in clips of my parents' public statements alongside their private texts. I showed how they'd misrepresented my story, how they'd turned their own son into a PR campaign. Julia helped me edit, adding a mournful cello under the montage, followed by my soft, unfiltered voice. "You taught me to chase perfection. You told me mistakes were for children. But what you never taught me was how to forgive." When the episode went live on Sunday night, it blew the lid off the board fight. Listeners were rattled by the sheer audacity of it, a well-produced, emotionally raw exposé that didn't just accuse, but invited people to watch with open hearts. Meanwhile, my college applications loomed like mountains on the horizon. The battle with my parents had derailed my senior year. I'd skipped prom, declined soccer tryouts, even missed the annual Model UN conference I'd chaired for 2 years running. Now I had to pull an entirely new narrative out of thin air, one that didn't sound bitter or victimized, but honest and forward-looking. I spent twilight hours in Julia's attic-turned-studio, scribbling my personal statement on wadded sheets of loose leaf. For 18 years, I played the role of the perfect son, until I realized perfection can be a prison. My dream is to study social psychology to understand how invisible rules shape behavior, and to help families rewrite their own experiments into stories of reconciliation. I read it aloud until the words felt like they grew from my own heart instead of my fear. In the chaos, Lily, my baby sister, disappeared from my life for the first time. She'd texted me once after the board meeting, a single emoji, a broken heart. I never replied. Part of me longed to comfort her. Another part was terrified that any connection might give my parents leverage to gaslight me with tearful family reunions. So I let her go, hoping she'd find her own way through the fallout. But when her startup pitch failed at the regional tech fair, she'd invented some smartwatch accessory that promised to revolutionize mindfulness. The blame game started. My parents blamed Lily. You should have paid more attention to your sister, they said, when I visited home to pack my things. Their words dripped with faux concern. But I recognized the same old pattern: use me as the scapegoat for their own mistakes, then pretend they were only protecting me all along. I slammed my door on the way out, pocket watch bumping against my hip, and heard Mom's voice call after me. You owe your family, Christopher. But I knew I owed myself more. It was during that drive back to Grandma's through the winding roads of the Santa Cruz Mountains, fog rolling in from the Pacific, that I realized something fundamental. My fight against my parents was no longer just about them. It was about every kid stuck in an unchosen role, every person whose agency was sacrificed for someone else's pride. I pulled over at a vista overlooking the cliffs, got out, and walked to the guardrail. The ocean churned below, restless and unrelenting. I closed my eyes, the salty breeze whipping my hair, and let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. In that moment, I felt a flood of empathy, not just for myself, but for Lily, for the friends who'd whispered their own stories on my podcast, for every teenager being molded into someone else's vision of success. I dropped the pocket watch onto the pavement. It shattered further on the asphalt pieces, tinkling away like tiny shards of regret. I crouched and picked up a fragment, the minute hand bent but intact. I tucked it into my pocket as a promise I would reassemble my life from the pieces, letting time guide me instead of bind me. Back at Grandma's, I gathered my allies, Julia Marcus and Ms. Patel. We met in the cramped living room walls lined with faded family photos. It's time for Plan B, I said, placing the minute hand on the coffee table like a talisman. Julia nodded, eyes bright. We pivot from exposing to empowering, she said. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, suggested we launch a mentorship network for kids in toxic family situations, leveraging our podcast audience and school connections. Ms. Patel offered to host workshops at Crestwood once the school year resumed to teach students how to negotiate boundaries and communicate needs without fear. I felt a surge of hope at the synergy of our ideas. We weren't just tearing down a broken system. We were building something new in its place. But hope came bundled with risk. The day we launched our mentorship initiative on Instagram, I called it #Own Your Time. My parents' attorneys fired off another legal threat. This one claimed defamation and demanded I cease all mention of the Nguyen name in my project materials. I froze when the email arrived, staring at the screen. Julia put a hand on my shoulder. They want to silence you, she said softly. But they can't. I swallowed my throat dry. We'll rebrand, I said after a moment. Call it the Dandelion Project. Dandelion because the wind carries its seeds away, scattering them so they can grow on new soil. A symbol for uprooting renewal resilience. We spent the rest of the afternoon brainstorming logos and domain names, transforming our setback into our signature. That night, as I lay in bed at Grandma's, the attic window cracked open to the sound of crickets. I thought about the glass shard in my pocket. It felt about the size of a heartbeat light against my thigh. I closed my eyes and imagined a dandelion, its white tufts floating free in the breeze, and I whispered aloud, "This is my time." A smile curled on my lips, half exhausted, half triumphant. Tomorrow, I would file the paperwork to incorporate the Dandelion Project as a nonprofit. I would book meeting rooms, line up speakers, reach out to counselors nationwide. I would turn my personal pain into collective power. And if my parents tried to stop me, I'd have the law, the community, and the wind at my back. But just as sleep began to pull me under, my phone buzzed with a notification from Lily, a video file. I hesitated, finger hovering over the play button. My heart thudded hard enough to wake the whole house. because I knew that turning to face my sister really facing her might open up wounds I'd barely healed, and it might demand sacrifices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. Yet I also knew that the most important experiments are the ones where you risk everything. So I tapped the screen, bracing myself for what came next, and the video started to play. I hit play on the video from Lily with a mix of dread and hope twisting in my chest. The screen lit up with her soft face, eyes, red-rimmed hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was sitting on her bedroom floor, posters of tech conferences and mindfulness apps plastered on the walls behind her. The camera wavered as she cleared her throat. "Hey, Chris," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know how else to reach you." My heart clenched. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and craving, the point where I had to choose between keeping Lily at arm's length or pulling her into the fight, knowing it could expose her to the same pain I'd endured. I pressed record on my phone, switched off all notifications, and leaned forward. "I'm listening," I whispered, as if speaking too loud would shatter her courage. She took a shaky breath and began to tell her side, how, after my victory at the school board, she'd felt guilty for celebrating while I bore the fallout. How the seed money from Dad had come with strings, late-night brainstorming sessions where they treated her like the shiny new prototype, praising her every idea, but then forcing her to cancel hangs with friends if she missed a KPI. How Aunt Karen had been whispering in her ear, telling her that if she succeeded, she could secure the family's legacy, leaving me, the first experiment, a cautionary tale. Lily's words were raw. Her pain mirrored mine, but tinted with confusion and loyalty. She didn't want to feel like she'd betrayed me, yet she'd craved the approval I'd always been denied. As she spoke, I felt a swell of empathy. This was my sister, the one person I might have forever lost if I'd continued to let them dictate my worth. I paused the video, closed my eyes, and let the reality sink in. Our family's dysfunction was bigger than me. It had woven its way into both our lives. That afternoon, I headed back to Crestwood Prep for the first assembly of the year. The bleachers were packed, the gym smelling of polished wood and anticipation. I stepped up to the podium, minute hand fragment in my hand, and let the hush wash over me. "This year," I said, voice echoing, "we're starting something new." I held up the shard. "This is not just a broken watch. It's a promise to ourselves and to each other that time is ours, not theirs. Let's build the Dandelion Project together." A ripple of applause followed, but I didn't leave it there. I scanned the crowd, eyes landing on students who looked like they carried invisible weights, then on teachers who nodded thoughtfully. We all have our experiments, rules we didn't choose, expectations we didn't set. But we can rewrite the protocols and bloom where we're planted. When the assembly ended, students swarmed me with questions. How do I sign up? Can I share my story? Do you think my counselor will let me host a workshop? Their eagerness was intoxicating. For the first time, I sensed a community forming around our shared struggle. But the risk was clear. Not everyone wanted to uproot their own lives. Whispers circulated that the Nguyen family was leveraging their influence to intimidate anyone who joined. I could feel the tension crackling in the air as I passed posters advertising the first Dandelion meetup alongside those denouncing me as the cursed watch kid. That night, I met Julia and Marcus at our usual spot, the overgrown courtyard behind the school. The moonlight filtered through eucalyptus leaves, casting long shadows. Marcus fiddled with a drone camera, wanting to live stream our planning session. Julia spread out a blueprint of the first workshop, Boundary Building 101, complete with interactive exercises, role-playing scenarios, and a symbol, the dandelion seed. "We'll have everyone blow on a paper seed at the end," she said, eyes alight. "A collective release." I nodded, imagining hundreds of white tufts drifting away, each one a weight lifted. But then Marcus paused the drone calibration and looked at me seriously. "Chris, there's chatter students who were once with us are backing out. They're scared of the Nguyen PR machine. They got letters from your dad's lawyers saying they're liable for defamation if they participate." The words landed like stones in my gut. I thought about Lily's gamble in that video, about Aunt Karen's poisonous whispers. It was one thing for me to risk everything. It was another to pull innocent classmates onto the front lines. I swallowed hard. "We need a new plan," I said, feeling the familiar churn of adrenaline, one that protects people's identities until they're ready to step forward. Julia and Marcus looked at each other, then back at me. Anonymity. Julia said, nodding. "We can start with a secure online forum encrypted invite only, then gradually transition to in-person events when participants feel safe." I felt a spark of relief. Yes, that's brilliant. Let's call it the Dandelion Circle. We spent the next hours tinkering with the website, mock-up, brainstorming digital icebreakers and privacy assurances. We quoted lines from podcasts about vulnerability and bravery, and as dawn approached, I realized that our movement was evolving just like the dandelion itself adapting to new soil. But the logical twist came the very next day. I walked into my first period class to find my seat replaced with a mannequin-sized replica of me dressed in a suit holding a pocket watch with the word "trial" stamped across its face. Underneath a banner read, "Don't be a guinea pig." Gasps erupted, some laughter, a few nods of support. It was terrifying and genius in its cruelty, a public performance orchestrated by my parents using the court of school opinion against me. I felt my stomach drop. "Really," I muttered, sinking into the seat next to Marcus. He gave me a sympathetic shrug. Across the aisle, I saw Lily in the back row, her face pale, eyes wide. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," and then ducked behind her hair. The bell rang. I stood up, cleared my throat, and addressed the mannequin as if I were in a courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, or at least who they'd like me to be, a cautionary exhibit in an experiment gone awry." I paced slowly, voice steady. "But I am not a piece of evidence. I am a person with agency, with dreams beyond their protocols." The room fell silent. I pointed at Lily. "That girl back there is my sister, and she has her own story to tell separate from their narrative." Heads turned. I saw curiosity spark in the eyes around me. "So am I a guinea pig? Or am I the one who decides when to let go of their expectations and blow away just like these seeds?" I scattered a handful of paper dandelion seeds, white confetti, across the desk. They fluttered down. "That's for you," I said. "Your time is yours." And with that, I swept out of the room, leaving whispers in my wake. After class, Lily caught up to me in the hallway. "Chris, that was wow," she stammered. "But you have to be careful. They'll come after you again." I put a hand on her shoulder. "I've been careful my whole life, Lily. And look where it got me. I'd rather burn bright than fade away." She hesitated, eyes glistening. "Okay," she said softly. "I want in, but I need your help." I nodded, my stomach clenching. This was the turning point, forging an alliance that could either heal or destroy us both. "We'll do it together," I promised, feeling the fragile threads of family trust begin to stitch themselves anew. That night, Lily and I huddled over our laptops in Grandma's kitchen, the counters cluttered with empty mug after mug of tea. We drafted the Dandelion Circle's manifesto, weaving in her voice, "I am more than an encore to my brother's debut." We built a portal where people could share stories anonymously and access resources on boundary setting and self-advocacy. When we hit publish, the site glowed on the screen, its clean interface dotted with clickable dandelion icons. "Let's watch them unfurl," Lily whispered, exhilaration and fear dancing in her voice. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Together," I said. By dawn, the site had hundreds of registrations, teens like us who craved a place to breathe. But the victory was tinged with danger. My parents had already served a subpoena to the website host demanding user data. I stared at my phone as the notification blinked. The battle lines were drawn, but this time it wasn't just my fight, it was ours. And as I watched the pale morning light seep through the curtains, I knew that no matter how many legal threats they threw, they couldn't extinguish a movement born from real stories and real courage. Yet deep inside, I felt a tremor of doubt. Was I asking too much of Lily? And could I protect the people whose voices I'd amplified? The questions hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting, pointing toward a crossroads where the next choice would determine whether we flourished like dandelions in the sun or wilted under the weight of retribution. I woke up to the sharp ping of an email notification before my alarm even had the chance to rattle me awake. Urgent, subpoena received. My stomach dropped. They, my parents' legal team, had gone straight to our web host demanding the Dandelion Circle user data. I stared at the message, bleary-eyed, clutching the fractured watch fragment in my hand. It felt colder than usual, a tiny shard of metal reminding me that time can be weaponized as easily as it can be reclaimed. I forced myself out of bed, wrapped my grandmother's quilt around my shoulders, and stumbled into the kitchen where Lily was already pacing, phone in hand, eyes red from sleeplessness. "We need a contingency plan," she said, voice taut. "If they get that data, everyone's exposed." I nodded, pulling my laptop onto the table. "We go dark today," I decided. Encrypted backups mirror sites move to peer-to-peer messaging. It was a risky pivot, cutting off the public platform that had given us momentum, but protecting our community was more important than visibility. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a paper dandelion seed, the real thing, pressed and dried weeks ago. "We started with this symbol," she said, handing it to me. "Let's end with it too." I nodded, tapping the fragile seed gently. In that moment, the dandelion became our battle flag, small, white, and capable of taking root anywhere. By mid-morning, Julia and Marcus arrived at Grandma Lynn's house for an emergency coding session. The attic, once dim and cluttered, was alive with activity whiteboards covered in flowcharts, empty coffee mugs piled on the desk, extension cords snaking across the floor like arteries. Marcus set up his camera as Julia toggled between firewall settings. I paced, rehearsing how I'd explain the shutdown to our followers without sparking panic. My heart thudded against my ribs like a war drum, but I reminded myself I'd faced down my own family in a glass-walled boardroom. I could handle this. At noon, I posted a simple message on every channel: Dandelion Circle is entering a protected phase. Please check your email for instructions on secure access. We'll bloom again soon, stronger, safer. I hit send and waited, watching the server logs for any sign of intrusion. They came hundreds of failed login attempts, IP addresses, traced back to law firms, school networks, even the tech startup where my mom worked. My blood ran cold. They were trying to break in to drag our allies into the open. Without thinking, I stood on a chair, grabbed a dry erase marker, and scrawled in huge letters on the attic whiteboard, "Who are we, seeds, not lab rats?" Below, I sketched a dandelion whose seeds drifted away, each one labeled with words like courage, truth, community. It felt like a manifesto. That afternoon, Lily and I held our first encrypted group call. Faces flickered on the screen, avatars of teenagers, young adults, even a few parents who'd recognized the pattern of control in their own families. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of curfews enforced by GPS trackers, scholarships withheld as bargaining chips, therapy sessions weaponized to fix them. Each confession was a dagger twisting in my gut, a cruel echo of my own childhood. But as I listened, something fierce and unyielding bloomed inside me. Solidarity. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a broader social epidemic, familial power imbalances wrapped in well-intentioned rhetoric. I looked at Lily, whose fingers trembled on her phone, and said, "We're exposing more than just names. We're shining light on a system that treats love like leverage." Her eyes glistened with tears, pride, fear, and a knowing that we were all in this together. But no good deed goes unpunished. That night, I found a driveway light email from Crestwood Prep's principal: urgent meeting tomorrow. Parent complaints about student activism. I felt my throat tighten. School administration, under pressure from the Nguyen legal team, was looking to discipline me. I remembered the hunger in my parents' eyes when they buried me under subpoenas and cease and desist letters. They wanted to make an example of me. I slid the watch fragment into my palm nails, digging into the metal. I wouldn't go quietly. The next morning, I walked into the principal's office carrying only my backpack laptop and a single dried dandelion seed in an envelope. Principal Johnson sat behind her desk, posture stiff. "Chris," she began. Voice measured, "We've received complaints that your group is causing disturbance and emotional harm to students who feel pressured to participate." I held up the envelope. "These seeds have been gathering dust in my grandmother's attic," I said quietly. "They're fragile, but they carry life. You can't crush them without breaking them, but if you handle them right, they'll turn into flowers. That's what we're doing. We're seeding hope, not harm." Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to me. "We're considering suspension," she said. My heart pounded. Suspension would kill the Dandelion Circle's momentum. But I squared my shoulders. "I'll accept any consequence," I said, "because I'd rather be expelled than complicit in a system that punishes victims for speaking out." The room was silent, but for the hum of a fluorescent light. Principal Johnson studied me, then sighed. "I'll see what I can do," she said, stamping a file. "Don't make me regret it." I left without looking back, adrenaline buzzing in my veins. That afternoon, Lily texted, "I'm sorry. They served me 2 mandatory counseling for peer facilitation." My chest tightened. In trying to protect her, I'd drawn her into the fray. But then I remembered the dandelion's resilience. Even a crushed seed can sprout. I replied, "We stand together. Tomorrow we'll talk strategy." I felt sick, but also unbreakably determined. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through Grandma's garden, past the rose bushes and the old fig tree to the patch of wild dandelions growing at the fence line. I knelt and picked one, its fluffy head catching the porch light. I stared at it, delicate yet defiant, and whispered, "This one's for you, Lily, and for every kid who's been silenced." I blew, and the seeds scattered into the dark, drifting toward the houses next door where parents slept oblivious. As the seeds floated away, I felt both dread and exhilaration. I'd set a plan in motion that night, an offline clandestine series of dandelion drops where anonymous volunteers would plant seeds of solidarity in chalk messages and sticker campaigns around town. "Not a guinea pig, your time is yours, Bloom." Anyway, it was guerrilla activism, pure and raw. It risked legal action for vandalism, but I trusted it. Art that demands attention can't be jailed. Tomorrow, we'd distribute stencil kits and coordinate via burner phones. And just like that, the Dandelion Circle would transcend screens and inhabit the real world. But as I pocketed the dandelion and headed back inside, I heard Grandma calling me softly. I turned, her silhouette framed in the kitchen doorway, eyes wise. She held out a cracked teacup filled with warm brew. "Every revolution needs a heart," she said, placing the cup in my hands. "Don't lose yours." I felt tears burn behind my eyelids. I nodded, voice catching, "I'll fight Grandma. For Lily, for everyone." She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Just remember," she said, "even dandelions need roots." And with that, she slipped away into the dark hallway, leaving me with the weight of her words and the taste of jasmine tea on my tongue. I curled into bed, the night alive with possibility and peril. The legal threats loomed, the school showdown beckoned, and the grassroots campaign had barely begun. But in my pocket, the dandelion seed lay safe, small, potent, a living symbol that even under the harshest gaze, the right to grow and be heard cannot be denied. I closed my eyes, heart thrumming, and whispered into the darkness, "Let them try to stop us." And just before sleep claimed me, I felt it, the sweet ache of being truly alive in the moment before everything changes. I woke to the shrill ring of my phone, an alarm I'd set for dawn's first light. Outside, the sky was still that bruised purple that promises both hope and dread. I swung my legs over the side of the bed at Grandma Lynn's, feeling the familiar ache of adrenaline still pulsing from yesterday's dandelion drops. Every muscle trembled with anticipation. Today was the day we'd take everything we'd built, the Dandelion Project, the Circle, the guerrilla art campaign, and push it past the edge of comfort into something irreversible. I slipped the final dandelion seed pressed between wax paper into the pocket of my hoodie. It was small, fragile, and yet it held worlds of possibility. Downstairs, Lily was already awake, kneading dough for cinnamon rolls, the one thing Grandma Lynn insisted we master before our revolution. The aroma of yeast and sugar curled through the kitchen. "Morning, strategist," she said, flashing me a tired grin. "Ready to mobilize?" I nodded, grabbing a roll. The warmth melted the tension in my hands. "More than ever," I said. We drank tea in silence, the kind brewed from leaves Grandma picked herself, each sip a tether to our roots, even as we prepared to scatter across new ground. By mid-morning, the courtyard behind Crestwood Prep was flooded with volunteers, students, after-school club members, even a handful of teachers who'd quietly slipped their names onto our encrypted roster. We handed out kits, stencils of dandelion silhouettes, chalk bombs, biodegradable stickers, and a quick tutorial on how to leave seed messages in places where they'd catch the most eyes: on the footbridge over El Camino Real, in the bathroom stalls of the business studies wing, along the concrete steps of the public library downtown. Each stencil carried a phrase: "Time is yours, not a lab rat bloom." Anyway, as dusk approached, I watched the first wave of dandelion imprints bloom like constellations across the valley. But no campaign worth its salt runs smoothly. An hour into the operation, my phone buzzed again, a live video from Marcus, his face lit by the glow of smartphone screens. Riot police cruisers had cordoned off a block on Market Street where students had scrawled a giant dandelion on the asphalt outside a law firm known to represent the Nguyen estate. They'd been mistaken for vandals targeting local businesses. Suddenly, our peaceful art project was painted as a public safety threat. My heart lurched as I watched kids being herded into police vans, their sneakers scuffing pastel chalk into the tarmac. I felt the ground shift beneath me. What had begun as symbolic resistance was spiraling into real danger. I sprinted toward the commotion, Lily at my heels. We burst onto the scene just as officers began erasing the chalk with high-pressure hoses. One student, tears streaking chalk lines down her cheeks, held up her hands in surrender. "We're not vandals," she cried. "We're just seeds." The raw defiance in her voice cracked something open inside me. I raised my own hands, pressing the wax-papered dandelion seed against an officer's riot shield. "Look," I shouted. "This is our symbol. We plant hope. We don't break windows." For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The hoses paused. Officers glanced at each other. The crowd held its breath. Then a sergeant barked an order and the hoses roared back to life. I grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her out of the spray, Lily pulling another volunteer away. We retreated up a side street, hearts hammering, lungs burning with chalk and fear. As we collapsed behind a row of potted ferns outside a shuttered cafe, Lily looked at me, eyes wide. This is bigger than we thought," she panted. I nodded, pressing the seed to my lips. "We knew it would get risky," I said. "This is the point where truth meets reaction. We can't stop now." That night, I addressed my followers in a raw, unedited live stream from my phone, the camera shaking as I spoke. I showed the footage of police hosing down chalk flowers of students in handcuffs smeared with colored dust. "This is what happens when a movement refuses to fade," I said, voice hoarse. "When hope is mistaken for harm, the system will fight back. But every drop of chalk washed away only means one thing: our message is powerful enough to scare them." Comments scrolled faster than I could read, some condemning, many supportive, others promising legal aid. I signed off with a whisper: "Bloom anyway." In the days that followed, the legal threats escalated. Subpoenas for student organizers, cease and desist letters demanding removal of all Dandelion Project content, an injunction filing that threatened to freeze our nonprofit's bank account. Each blow felt like a knockout punch, yet somehow we kept rising. Our encrypted forum swelled to thousands of members. Lily spearheaded an online mentorship series pairing survivors of family coercion with counselors. Julia organized a virtual gallery of digital art inspired by our movement dandelions pulsating across screens in fractal patterns. And I kept winding that damn broken watch fragment, letting its weight remind me that time was both finite and infinite. Then came the twist. I hadn't foreseen: a letter from my parents delivered by their attorney addressed to me and Lily jointly. It was formal, oddly conciliatory, proposing mediation to rebuild family unity under the auspices of a private counselor. They even enclosed a check and offer to fund the Dandelion Project's scholarships, on the condition that we remove their names from all future public communications. My stomach churned as I read it aloud to the core team in Julia's attic. "They want control and credit," I said, voice tight. "They want to co-opt our movement." Lily slammed her fist on the table. "Are we going to sell out now?" she demanded. The room grew still. We'd fought so hard to reclaim agency. Could we now give it away for money? I held the broken watch fragment in my palm, feeling the cold edges press into my skin. A rush of anger filled me. Anger at my parents for turning love into leverage, at Aunt Karen for flipping every kindness into a con, at the system that criminalized our hope. But beneath the anger was clarity. "We don't need their money," I said firmly. "We need autonomy." We started as seeds scattered by the wind, not planted by rich hands. "We'll grow by our own will." The relief that flickered in Lily's eyes was enough. We drafted our response: gratitude for their offer, but a firm refusal to negotiate our principles or silence our story. As I sealed the letter, I felt the weight of the campaign settle into something like pride. We'd faced family bureaucracy, public opinion, and policing, and we'd refused to wilt. Yet I also knew this was not the end. The nexus of social belief that says family always comes first still cast long shadows over our community. We had to prove that speaking truth to power, especially within the walls of our own homes, was not betrayal, but liberation. So I took the final dandelion seed from my pocket and pressed it between the pages of our collective manifesto, a book we'd begun to compile stories of struggle, blueprints for resistance, personal reflections. It would be our heirloom, a testament that even in broken systems, broken watches, and broken homes, the human spirit can clock its own time. That night, as the valley lights twinkled below and the breeze carried the faint whistle of distant trains, I sat on the rooftop with Lily and Julia. The city spread like a mosaic of stories at our feet. I closed my eyes and felt the pulse of possibility thrumming in the air. The watch fragment lay on the ledge beside me, half buried in chalk dust. I whispered into the darkness, "Our time is ours." And the wind seemed to answer, scattering the words across rooftops and boulevards, carrying them to every seed waiting to be freed. In that moment, I understood the story we started as a family drama had grown into a social reckoning, and the real climax was not a final victory, but the promise that the struggle, like a dandelion in bloom, would continue wherever it was needed most. Story 2. I'm Maya Nguyen, and I turned 18 on the day I boarded a plane to college. I'd spent my first semester buried in textbooks and late-night study sessions, dreaming that home would feel different when I returned. I was wrong. The shuttle dropped me at the curb around 3 in the afternoon. I wheeled my duffel through sliding doors and into the arrivals hall. My heart pounded. I scanned every sign: welcome home, family pickup. There was nothing for me. Just strangers hugging, laughing, scanning faces. No missed calls, no unread texts. My phone stayed silent. I took a shaky breath and dialed my sister Zoe. At 16, she was glued to her phone all day. Rings, rings, voicemail. Next, I tried my dad, David. Straight to voicemail. I watched a little girl tug her mom's hand and point at me. Why is he just standing there? She asked. Heat spread across my cheeks. I forced myself not to run. 12 calls later, I gave up. I leaned against a pillar, pretending to scroll Instagram. My scholarship letter burned in my pocket. My mom, Rachel, had texted me once, "Want attention, try not to let us down." I stared at the message. My hands trembled. I wondered if it was a joke. It wasn't. The sun dipped lower. The airport staff began to shuffle toward closing. I flagged down an Uber and paid $40 I barely had. The driver asked if everything was okay. I mumbled, "Just go home." By 6, I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd grown up in. Through the front window, I saw balloons, streamers, and a crowd my family, my brother's friends. My brother Lucas was turning 20 that day. He had a new job at a local firm, and tonight was his celebration. I stepped onto the porch, took a steadying breath, and rang the bell. Dad opened the door with a tight smile. "Well, look who finally showed up," he said, stepping aside. No hug, no apology, just a shove toward the living room. Music pounded, laughter bubbled. I carried my bag inside. Zoe sat on the couch, scrolling her phone. She glanced up, rolled her eyes, and turned away. Lucas hovered near the snack table, chatting about his big career move. I tried to slip by. He bumped my shoulder without looking. I mumbled, "Excuse me," but he just laughed and raised his voice. "Can't you see we're busy?" He meant me. I should have held my tongue. Instead, I pushed past him harder than I'd intended. Lucas stepped forward, knocked my bag from my shoulder, and my notebooks and clothes spilled across the floor. Silence cut the music. Plates clattered. No one moved. I knelt and gathered my things. Not a single hand reached out to help. Not Mom, not Zoe, not Dad. I stood, dusted off my jeans, and walked down the hallway to my old bedroom. My key no longer worked. Dad claimed I lost it too often. I yanked on the doorknob until it opened. Inside, I dropped my bag by the desk and slammed the door. I pressed my back against the wood and let the tears come. I kicked the wall once harder than I meant. It hurt more than seeing my bruised pride. My phone buzzed, 37 texts from Dad. "Please come home. We miss you. Everything's fine." I stared at the screen. I didn't type back. I sank to the floor, scrolling through old messages. Every time I needed a ride, I was on hold. Every time I shared good news, my texts sat on scene. But I fixed Zoe's laptop without a thank you. I set up the Wi-Fi after he stomped the router. I proofread Lucas's cover letters and proofread his presentations. They called me useless, lazy, and background noise until they needed me. Tonight, I decided that ends now. I packed a small bag, a change of clothes, my laptop, my scholarship papers, my bank card. Enough for a few nights. I didn't lock the door behind me. I shoved it closed and left it ajar. I wanted them to know I left by choice. I crossed the yard and slipped out through the side gate. The house lights were still on. I glanced back. Inside, they were celebrating Lucas. He raised a glass. They cheered. None of them looked up when I slipped into the dark. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel. My heart pounded with relief and fear. I texted my best friend, "Can I crash at yours?" Seconds later, "Of course! Come now!" I exhaled. As I drove away, I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew this: I would no longer be their safety net, their free tech support, their backup plan. I was done being their invisible daughter. This was the first step toward carving out a life where I mattered, and it felt like flying. I pulled into Alex's driveway just as twilight bled into the sky. His old brick house smelled of cinnamon rolls and worn leather, nothing like the antiseptic halls of my own home. I dragged my suitcase through the door where he tacked up a welcome sign, Maya's Corner. That first night, I curled up on his ratty couch, the cushions groaning under me, and stared at a cracked mirror propped against the wall. In it, my eyes looked smaller, world-weary, but determined. I reached for my journal, blank pages, waiting for every favor I'd ever done, every silent apology I'd offered, every text I'd swallowed, and whispered, "This time you're writing for yourself." Then I asked the dark room, What will I become without all their expectations? The next morning, I found a tiny room on the second floor of a house share chipped paint, a single window overlooking a dumpster, and a struggling maple tree. I paid the first month's rent with trembling fingers, then walked to the grocery store, my bag echoing in the empty streets. At the counter, I swapped small talk with the cashier. She told me about her kid's asthma. I nodded and handed over the crumpled bills I'd saved. Back in my room, I laid out my receipts like trophies, bus fares, Uber rides, late-night pizzas when I felt lonely. I taped them around the mirror where my reflection once belonged, creating a mosaic of my own making. Could these scraps of paper become the shield I never had? My phone buzzed with ghostly echoes of home, a screenshot of my mom's thumbs up emoji, a forwarded plea from Dad. Please come back. I swallowed hard and blocked the group chat. Outside, the city pulsed with strangers who didn't know my name but didn't expect my labor for nothing. On the streetcar home, I caught sight of a billboard "Family First" in slick white letters. I laughed so hard my throat burned. Family wasn't universal, it was conditional. I tapped a reply to Dad. I'm not lost, I'm living. But I stopped before hitting send. Was I betraying a taboo by refusing to play background music in their perfect sitcom? I found myself volunteering at a community center 3 nights a week, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. It was risky. I'd never led a class before, but I saw their eyes light up when they mastered send or save. A sunflower mural spread across the back wall, golden petals reaching for an unseen sun. The center director, Mr. Chen, recognized me from my high school graduation. He told me, "You've always had something fierce behind those eyes." My chest flushed. I'd hidden that spark for years. As I packed up keyboards at dusk, I felt my own roots growing into something sturdy. Yet a quiet thought lingered. Did I leave one tree to finally blossom under another? Late one night, I sat cross-legged on the floor drafting a letter I'd never send to Dad's stubborn pride, to Mom's scornful thumbs up, to Zoe's rolling eyes, to Lucas's bumped shoulder. I wrote every hurt, every silent tear on that page. When I finished, I folded the letter into an origami crane, fragile wings, and a hopeful neck. I pressed it against my heart and wondered if forgiveness could carry flight or if it would shatter like porcelain in my hand. Could an unmelted heart ever learn to forgive, or was I too far gone? I slipped the crane into a shoebox alongside the taped-up receipts and my scholarship letter, then locked the room and walked away. The corridor lights flickered overhead as I descended the stairs. Behind me, my door was closed, but not defeated. Ahead, the city stretched with its roaring traffic, its late-night diners, its neon promise that I could mean something more than a footnote in someone else's story. I exhaled, tasting freedom and fear in equal measure. The next morning, I'd decide whether to send that crane flying into family hands or the wind. And in that moment, I realized every choice was mine, unbound. I woke to the low hum of traffic outside Alex's old row house, the aroma of ramen still clinging to my hoodie. In the kitchen, I made coffee from beans at the corner shop, a reminder I was on my own schedule. I leaned my forehead against the fridge where receipts and that origami crane were taped like trophies. I sipped the bitter brew and opened my laptop to revise my design portfolio one more time, fingers trembling. The nonprofit's application deadline loomed at midnight, and I had no margin for error. Every rejected internship whispered that conformity was a cage. I hit send and watched the progress bar crawl, heart-pounding. Alex knocked, reminding me of the community center workshop I'd agreed to lead. Saying yes would trade hours I needed for myself, but Mr. Chen's faith felt like wind at my back. I closed the laptop without reading the confirmation email, grabbed my satchel, and left before second-guessing. The door clicked behind me, and I wondered which part of me I'd left on that doorstep. I thought of my sister Zoe stuck in the same script, and I wondered if my leap would spark courage in her, or if it would only widen the distance between us. At the community center, I was greeted by a mosaic of sunflower tiles and a cracked stained glass window depicting a phoenix that seemed to sag under its own fragility. The cold draft danced across the computer tables, and I felt it all the way into my bones as the seniors filed in, stooped backs, hopeful smiles trembling, fingers gripping a mouse. They hunched over monitors, eyes lighting up when they figured out how to attach a photo or send an email. I pulled a bundle of paper cranes from my bag and perched on a wobbling stool, tucking delicate wings into the fissure like a surgeon stitching skin. A cleaning lady paused mid-sweep and watched her eyes misting. The hush in the room felt heavier than any applause I'd ever earned. My heart thundered, but I kept placing crane after crane until the window looked willing to hold itself together again. When I finally climbed down, a dozen pairs of grateful eyes followed me, warm and bright. In that moment, I understood that vulnerability and resilience are two sides of the same wing, and that sometimes the smallest fold of paper can mend a lifetime of broken promises, and perhaps my own too. On the walk home, the city felt softer, as if mended by those small acts. My satchel slid against my hip, the weight of unpaid favors feeling lighter with every step. I passed a mural that read, "It takes a village," but I knew villages could turn their backs as easily as they shared warmth. I slowed in front of my childhood house. Lights glowed behind the curtains, laughter floated through the glass. I watched a mother cradle her crying son in a doorway and felt my throat tighten at how easy love could feel when it didn't demand sacrifice. A light rain began blotting my reflection until I couldn't tell tears from raindrops. I closed my eyes and waited for a confession or apology, but none came. So I wiped my palm and kept walking, leaving footprints in puddles that carried me away from every expectation. As the streets glistened under lamplight, I felt a quiet pride stir, no longer someone's background noise, but the author of my own path, still carrying a knot in my chest that whispered, "Does freedom always demand a loss?" Days later, my inbox pinged with an invitation the nonprofit wanted to meet. My fingers trembled when I clicked the accept meeting button, as if sealing a pact with both my dreams and my fears. I should have felt elation, but I hesitated, recalling weekend workshops and unpaid favors I'd traded to prove I wasn't the lazy daughter. Every grateful smile felt like both currency and a tether pulling me back whenever I tried to soar. I sketched a roadmap from the airport curb to Alex's sofa, the cracked Phoenix window, rainy sidewalks, and now this new fork. I placed a crane sticker at each point, a silent pledge to claim each step for myself. As I folded a fresh crane to nestle atop the map, I thought of sending it home, an unsigned letter of triumph. But I paused, wondering if forgiveness had to travel both ways. I tucked the crane into my notebook and whispered, "I'm ready," though I didn't know which voice inside me would answer.